Okay, why don't we go ahead and get started? If you could please have your seats, that would be most appreciated. Welcome to the Monday, November 17th, City Council work session. We've got a busy agenda, so we should go ahead and get started. Before we do, I'd like to welcome Cindy Mester back. We're delighted to have you back with us. Thank you. We've been thinking of you and rooting for you, so we're delighted to have you back and appreciate to have you with us again. So, yeah.
Glad to be back.
Good, good. Mr. Shields, why don't we go ahead and get started with the first item, if we could?
Okay. Well, Mayor Tarter, members of council, I did want to just note one thing on the agenda before we get started with the first item. Item 5 on the agenda is a resolution of appreciation for Congressman Moran, and we have a draft in your packet. And it would be unusual for a work session, but we were going to suggest tonight, if the council is so disposed, to actually take action on that resolution tonight at the end of this meeting so that it can then be prepared. Congressman Moran is planning to be at your meeting on the 24th, along with Senator Saslaw and Delegate Simon. And so it would be an opportunity to present him that resolution of appreciation. So I wanted to just give a forewarning of that intent, and then obviously it's the council's decision whether you do that or not. So our first item on the agenda, we're very pleased to have the Virginia Society of American Institute of Architects emerging leaders. We have several of our emerging leaders here tonight. But we have been working with this group for many months now on a project in the city, and we're very pleased and excited to now allow them to present their findings and recommendations for actions we can take to sustain and revitalize our downtown area. And I'd like to bring Lauren Bruce. Is Lauren Bruce? Here. There's Lauren. Hello, Lauren. To give an introduction to our presenters tonight and to Brian Fricke, who helped bring this group to the City of Falls Church to do this good work.
Professional planner, and he's been with the Kearns Group for 30 years, maybe 30 plus. Before that, he was with a couple other firms in the D.C. area. The Kearns Group specializes in institutions, schools, churches, renovation and historic preservation. And after many years in Arlington, the group moved in February to the former Oddfellows building off of Maple. So that's where they're located today. Brian graduated from Auburn. We won't hold that against him, Phil. And he has a real passion for developing emerging leaders and who are looking to pursue excellence in architecture. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brian and let him. You want to set up? Oh, you got a mic up there? Okay. I'm going to let him introduce and talk, first of all, talk a little bit about what he's been doing and how it came back around to them choosing us as a test case here, so to speak.
Good. Thank you, Lauren. I'll make it brief. The Virginia Society of Architects about 10 years ago decided that it was time to make better architects connected and more engaged with communities. And we decided the best way to do that was to create a program where we could talk about principles about once a month on the way that architects could successfully engage communities. And then to actually give them a place to try out some of those ideas. It became the Emerging Leaders in Architecture program. It's done by application every year. In fact, this time of year, we are in the applications process. We'll sort through and select 16 participants for the next year's class. We also decided that the best way to give them opportunities to practice was to give them real-world projects with real consequences, but without the implications of everything that goes on in an office for it being a real project. So the first project was in Alexandria at the West End, and it moved around the state going through Norfolk, Richmond, Charlottesville, Roanoke, and this year, in the 6th year, it's back to Northern Virginia. So we approached the planning staff and we approached Wyatt's office and found that there were some ready projects, some places that need the insight of some architects. Tonight what you're going to hear is a presentation of what this group of people did. I represent somewhere in the neighborhood of about 100 architects all over the state that are engaged in trying to make this program for young architects. They represent the people that you're going to hear from tonight, the entire participants of the Emerging Leaders Program for 2014. So let me introduce you your presenters, just knowing that what they're presenting to you as a project was the Learning Lab, was the portion of their year where they got to try out some of these ideas. So we're going to hear from tonight from Rachel Williams and Nick. In the back here, we've got Jason and David, who have all hailed from Northern Virginia. 2 of them work here in Falls Church. The rest of them work in Northern Virginia. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, thank you.
Would you like to turn the lights off? Would that be better for you?
Yes, that'd be great. We'll do just one set of lights right here.
So when we came to Falls Church, we came up with an easy question, or one that we found easy to answer, and that is, what makes Falls Church such a great place? We found a great, rich history, wonderful cultural venues like the State Theater, a nationally ranked school system, and one of the best farmers markets in the country. But the downtown area doesn't necessarily reflect those great aspects of the community. It's a place dominated by cars. And as you can see here, not a place that's very welcoming for pedestrians. And over the years, the city's recognized this a few times. You can see that over and over, plans have been developed to address this. And these plans hinge on some of the larger scale developments that we see in neighboring communities, such as Reston, Arlington, and Silver Spring. But Falls Church is a little different. The downtown area hasn't really grown out of these large scale developments. So in 2010, the City Planning Department worked with Virginia Tech students in the College of Urban Affairs and Planning to develop a new plan, one that focuses more on smaller ideas. And those ideas ended up being incorporated into the small area plan that was recently adopted by the city last summer. So you can see downtown we have some of these orange areas, which are infill development with structured parking around the periphery of the city, and then a pedestrian core downtown. And just to restate a little bit of what Brian said, we're the Emerging Leaders in Architecture program, which is an honors academy through the Virginia Society of the American Institute of Architects. We're made up of students, young professionals, registered architects, and individuals who recently graduated from architecture programs across the state. And that's really what brings us to Falls Church. And our study area was the 100 block and the 200 block of downtown. What we found is that the downtown area is incredibly walkable. Within 10 minutes, you can reach almost any business within the downtown core. And then within 30 minutes, you can get to public transportation at the metro station and then all of the surrounding neighborhoods easily. And we also found a lot of very strong, unique businesses. Independent retailers like Doodle Hopper, wonderful restaurants like the Dogwood Tavern, and also areas where popular events are held, First Fridays and Tinner Hills Blues Festival, all within walking distance of this 2-block area. But where are the people? Because this is such a place that's dominated by cars, most of the businesses along those streets have both a front entrance and a back entrance, which is oftentimes more frequently used, which creates an environment for cars, not people. So how do we bring more people downtown? We proposed a 3-part strategy that involves engaging the public, connecting the existing assets, and strengthening those core assets to invite more people downtown. So first, let's look at engaging the public. One way that we found that the city's already doing this is through public charrettes. This is a great way to bring residents, community leaders, and developers together to build consensus on urban planning issues in the city. Another way is to invite residents of the city downtown to actively engage in building their little city. One way that you see here is residents of this community took over a parking space for the day and installed a bench. Another way is kind of popping up around the country are little libraries where individuals can take a book and leave a book. And these all speak to a way to create a pride of place and give residents a way to establish a sense of ownership in their community. So let's look at connecting the existing strength, our second strategy. One of the easiest ways to do this is through wayfinding, and one that we've seen happen along Maple Avenue and Park Avenue for cyclists. But this also needs to happen for pedestrians too. Simply installing a sign outside the State Theater could draw visitors to a show at the State Theater downtown, let them know where to grab a bite to eat afterwards. Another way to do this is to install bike and pedestrian infrastructure, simply through installing park benches and bike racks can invite cyclists that are passing through to lock their bikes up and visit businesses. It's also another way to strengthen the city's identity by giving these a design feature. But these are just some of the smaller ideas that we've looked at. So let's look at some of the larger ideas.
Jane Jacobs famously said, "You can't rely on bringing people downtown, you have to put them there." And the thing is, Falls Church already has something that puts them there. The farmers market brings hundreds of people to the downtown area every weekend. It just puts them right over there, just outside of this downtown core area. So we thought, why not take that existing activity and energy and place it right in the center of downtown to Maple Avenue and temporarily closing it on market days. This move has many advantages. It not only connects hundreds of market goers with local retailers, it also eliminates any conflicts between the market and the day-to-day activities of the police department and the community center. It also allows the farmers market, which currently has a waiting list of over 20 vendors, to expand and allow all of those vendors to display and sell their goods. It also connects market goers with the Kaiser Permanente parking garage, which has spaces for free on weekends. One of the first questions that keeps popping up every time we start talking about this relocation is, how will this affect parking? So we got out there, we did our research, we counted those spots, and we found that this 2-block study area has 422 spaces currently. However, temporarily closing down the market and having it in the center of the downtown would bring that number down to 208 spaces. And we started to get concerned until we remembered the Kaiser Permanente parking garage has 550 spaces, which would bring that number back up to 758. We're confident that this move can work because we're not reinventing the wheel. This has been done before in communities across the country where public streets have been closed down for markets and festivals such as the Old Town, the King Street Art Festival in Old Town Alexandria. And they do this sometimes by using something as simple as a sign or a chalkboard to close down the road to indicate this is a space for pedestrians and not for cars. Some of these communities have even utilized things like custom carts in programs, much like a bike share, to not only encourage shoppers to take more goods home with them, but also to leave their cars at home and walk to the market. So once the existing assets have been connected, the next step would be to strengthen them and build upon them, starting with a permanent home for the farmers market. Currently, the farmers market consists of temporary tents set up by individual vendors. And if the market was moved this weekend or next weekend, that configuration could be duplicated along Maple Avenue. However, we see an opportunity to provide permanent structures with things like lighting and power that could really allow the market to thrive. These structures could not only define the location of the market, but serve as a visual landmark to the downtown area. In this rendering, one solution that we've come up with is to have tree-like structures as a nod to the Arbor Day Foundation's designation of Falls Church as a tree city. However, these structures could be determined by a design competition or by commissioning a local artist. Here you'll see where Columbia Heights has used similar structures to mark their downtown pedestrian plaza. Right beside this new market location is a city-owned property that we think would be a perfect location for a multi-use community hub. This hub could have things like storage for not only the farmers market, but any other activities like festivals. Could house those carts that we were talking about earlier. Could also have an office or a ticket booth or restrooms. Could even have Wi-Fi for non-market or festival days where people just want to come hang out, relax, and plug in. We envision this as an open but covered structure, much like Gateway DC and Southeast DC, or something like the Reston Town Center pavilion on the left, which is used as a skating rink in the winter and an outdoor entertainment venue in the summer. As the infill begins to develop on these two blocks, you'll notice there's plenty of space left over on the interior. We see this as an opportunity to start integrating things like green space and interactive elements to really create a place where people will want to stay and play. It's also an opportunity to create an experience for pedestrians from the State Theater all the way to Cherry Hill Park. Much like the downtown mall in Charlottesville, which features interactive elements as well as alternating greenscape and hardscape with consistent paving material throughout to indicate that the entire space is for pedestrians and is busy in the day and in the night and is lined with businesses that spill out into a path that terminates at an outdoor entertainment venue. Some examples of these interactive elements include outdoor games, interactive water elements, and a free speech wall, much like the one in Charlottesville. Here's an example of how all these elements can come together to really turn a space into a place. So in Falls Church, a space currently used for car storage can become a vibrant pedestrian plaza where residents can come and enjoy their city. So how does Falls Church move forward, grow organically, and maintain their little city identity? We think little steps as a larger part of a three-part plan to engage the public, connect existing assets, and strengthen core assets will help turn Falls Church from a space for cars to a place for people. Thank you.
That was very exciting and very thought-provoking, I think, and intriguing. It's great to have a set of eyes from outside the city to take a look anew at our places, our central places. I imagine there's some questions from folks. Why don't we go ahead and get started with that? Are there any questions from city council members who'd like to begin? Mr. Z?
Bring this closer to you all if you have questions.
So I would like to thank the future leaders of the architecture profession for spending the time and effort and examining how it is that we can create a place. I have always thought that a permanent farmers market would be the kind of draw that would, and you've articulated very well, strengthen core assets. So I would assume that you've asked the city during this process what it would take to create that. And so great ideas, founder on lack of attention to details. Are there things to this presentation and your ideas that you think we should be cognizant of and pay attention to as we go forward and trying to implement some of these elements?
I think one of the first things that the city could possibly do is engage the public. Talk to the local businesses down there to see if they're open to allowing their parking to be given up for a market. And I think that'd be a pretty simple conversation to have, mainly because if you insert that amount of people downtown, their businesses are going to thrive. We have restaurants that are open during market hours or start to open for brunch, say the Dogwood Tavern and Doodle Hopper. I mean, inserting putting families in there that can visit the store would enhance their business. So I think the first step would be to engage the public, certainly.
Let me just do a follow-up here. During your design process, did you have opportunity to talk to some of the shop owners and get a sense of receptivity on their part, or no?
No, that wasn't a part of our project, but thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? I've got one. I don't know if you all know, but we recently sold our water system to Fairfax Water, and in return received some money, which we've spent some time trying to figure out how to allocate. But a portion of that money may be spent on our downtown. And it may be the number I think that council allocated was in the neighborhood of maybe $1.7 million, up to $1.7 million. Are there any thoughts that come to you as low-hanging fruit if we were to spend, let's say, to save $1 million? What kind of things you would think are the first things, signage or sidewalks, or what kind of things occur to you looking at this that would be money well spent in your opinion?
Well, I think we've tried to identify a way to take those little small steps that could be easily implemented without a lot of capital investment. Some like the bike racks and the benches, for instance, are really small little things that could help create identity for the downtown and mark out more so that it's meant for pedestrians. It's starting to make that transformation in little ways, and also I think obviously our biggest move is moving the farmers market, which we said could be done, in the next weekend. Obviously there's some logistics around that, but closing down the street that you guys can control, and just moving the tents there on the weekend can start building that process. And then once you see all the activity that it generates, then you can invest more so into the infrastructure that the market could really use to continue to grow. I'd say also, we mentioned a design competition, and one of the things that we started with, we've basically presented a concept and some of the early initial ideas, but we mentioned also this idea that a design competition could be held, which would also generate a bunch of other ideas as well. So perhaps some little seed money might go into setting up a competition that could then produce several other schemes. We mentioned one possibility built around the idea of the Tree City. But again, it's limitless, and it's up to Falls Church as a community, not only as the community is engaged as a public, but also as a group of wider people come into the process. So one of the ideas, not only of building this downtown landmark with the stalls that could be the initial investment, but also investing in the further ideas that could be generated by this engagement. I think that's one of the other opportunity that could be provided with a small seed money.
Do you see this area as being kind of inward facing or kind of outward facing? In other words, right now, the typical idea would be that Route 7, your sidewalks, is where kind of the activity would occur on your sidewalks facing the street. But it seems, based on what I saw, at least how I interpreted it, it seems like you would focus really the activity more on the inner courtyard. In other words, the area that's now blacktop, asphalt, sidewalk. Is that what you all were thinking? I don't know if you understand the question or not, but
Well, acting in that way is something that's been done in many places across the country. I think one example is Katie's Alley in DC. Parking on the outside, generally street parking, but all the activities centered in the block itself. But the idea, I would say, to connect the two is once you create a city identity, say, with interactive elements or a gateway possibly between the pedestrian zone and the vehicular zone, you can begin to draw pedestrians into the block where most of the activity occurs.
Mr. Shields, do you know the ownership of that asphalt area? In other words, I think there's some city-owned parking area, but also some privately owned parking. Could you maybe describe a little bit about what your knowledge is of that area?
Could you go to the slide? We could probably point it out in broad terms.
Wyatt, can you use a wireless remote mic while you do that?
Is that big enough?
That probably will work. So the public right-of-way obviously is owned by the city. And then a triangle that goes like this and then up to Park Avenue is owned by the city. And then the city owns park that goes down so it goes up further than the park up to about right here. Those are the slivers that the city owns in the downtown area.
Okay, and the rest is owned privately?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Do we have other questions, Mr. Duncan?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You told me something that I did not know, which is alarming. You said that there are 20 vendors on a waiting list to get into our farmers market. Is that true, Howard? Somebody?
It actually is more than that frequently.
Close enough, Howard, I don't think.
We typically have at least 20 on the waiting list, depending upon a particular season. This winter, for instance, coming up, we've got probably 15 on the waiting list, and it's really just a matter of space and where they would go, and we don't have the space here.
Okay. Thanks for that answer. I find that highly alarming and a matter of great concern because we know we're in a competitive environment here when it comes to farmers markets. There are other jurisdictions near us that are seeing our success and the success of farmers markets elsewhere and are trying to duplicate them. I would urge that we move as quickly as we possibly can to accommodate the people who are on a waiting list. I like your sense of urgency that we could do it by this coming weekend. And I'm serious. That's why it's good to have people come and take a look from the outside at Little Falls Church sometimes. I don't want to get myself quoted in the newspaper, but our farmers market is it's very chic and it's a little well, I don't want to say shabby, but as you described it, it's a very temporary situation with tents that pop up and generators churning in the background and electrical cords and so forth. It is in my opinion ripe for improvement. I grew up in Knoxville, Tennessee, which has had a Market Square situation downtown for many years. It's ebbed and flowed, but now it's very successful. My son goes to school at West Virginia in Morgantown, where they have a structure, some of you may be familiar with it, which is very similar to what you describe, a open, covered downtown farmers market area, which has solar panels on the roof that feed electricity, charging stations, and so forth. Every time I go visit him there, I think, how come we don't have this? Even small towns like Wytheville and Richlands down in Southwest have facilities that are more like what you're describing than what we offer here. And all that is just to say that if it would be possible to temporarily expand our farmers market by locating it down the street, as you suggested, I would urge that we do that so that we can grow our farmers market and keep ourselves at the cutting edge of that business line in this area. And in the longer term, and by longer term I don't mean 15 years, I mean sometime next summer, I would like to see us move to establish some kind of situation for these vendors who come in that gives them power, water, maybe bathroom facilities, the kind of amenities that you usually associate with a civilized locale, which we need to offer, I think, in order to keep up with those around us who are getting on the farmers market bandwagon and putting us at risk of losing some of our vendors and maybe some of our customers, because we definitely want to keep all those people coming downtown. So I would just thank you. At some point tonight, later on, I want to follow up on the mayor's suggestion about, and I'm sorry I don't have my egg timer, so Mr. Mayor, you'll have to cut me off. I do want to ask about lighting. This is an evening activity, lighting of the trees. It's a standard kind of way to enliven the streetscape for evening activities. I guess there's no such thing as an evening farmers market, but in answer to the mayor's question about how might we expend some resources, I've asked the staff for some information about how we could do something this holiday season that would create in the evening that kind of, and given that it gets dark at 4 o'clock now, the evening comes earlier, but that would create the kind of something's going on down here that's good vibe that you're discussing creating during the daytime. So I'm sorry, that's not really a question, but I've thought about this a good bit, and I'm glad that you all give me an excuse to make these points. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Duncan. Other, Ms. Oliver?
When you calculated that the parking would go from 422 to 208 to 758, did you count in that equation the parking that would be freed up in the city parking lot?
No, that we excluded that from those numbers. It was just referring to the 2-block, 1 and 200 block of the study area.
Why would that be available for farmers market marking? So in fact, there would be even more parking if that was done?
About 40.
Okay. And then my other question is, Wyatt, realistically, what time frame do you think would be feasible for moving the farmers market?
Well, I think that's a question maybe Howard Herman could answer best, and Mike Collins. One thing that is just key is we have a very successful farmers market. It's popular. It serves our needs very well, and so we want to be very careful in making a move, and have whatever move we make. If we were to make a move, we want to make sure that that move is successful, and so how those how that would get worked out. We'd start with talking with the local merchants to see what their reaction to it would be, and then plan with the market manager as to what the market's needs are. But Howard has gotten this presentation earlier and has had some time to think about it. I think it might be useful to get Howard's initial thoughts on it.
I think that the market in this current location works in many, many ways, but there are many, many ways it does not work. And Mr. Duncan touched on a few of those. But I think to move the market, from my perspective, and I think from the vendors and producers' perspective, is they want something better than what is here. So I would be hesitant to move just for moving's sake, that wherever we go needs to be an improvement in the current location with permanent stalls, electricity, an area for entertainment to set up, all sorts of things. But the interaction that this type of proposal offers is something we can't do here. So by all means, and again, another positive to it is it's a short move. It's just down the street. It's not as if we'd be moving up by George Mason High School or down on Washington Street. We'd be really in the same neighborhood. So it'd be an easy, frequently when markets move, there's all sorts of chaos and we lose, or customers are lost. I don't see that as an issue here, moving that close.
I guess I'm just trying to get a general time frame, Wyatt, because I don't want people to walk out of here thinking we could do this weekend.
Now the permanent structure.
Well, what we have is a presentation by a group of volunteers and emerging leaders who've given some really good thought and helped oxygenate our thinking. And so I think probably what we would need to do then is, vet this idea and think about it. If the initial reactions, I think, have been that this is worth exploring, and so then we've got to figure out what flows from that. But ultimately, if there's going to be the types of improvements that Howard is talking about, permanent stalls, electricity, and types of things like that, then that's going to show up as a capital project. And but I think there's a lot more to it than just a capital project. It's a market planning project.
You still haven't given me a time.
I have no idea.
Here's just one practical question. So the parking areas, do we have the capacity to suspend enforcement of the towing regulations and so forth, or is that something that council would have to act to cause to happen if we wanted to just try to move it down the street? I mean, you
mean the towing on private property?
Right. I hear the disadvantage of moving is what you said. You're not moving to a better situation. The advantage is there's not a lot of infrastructure involved in moving. I mean, you pick up and go where you were just a few yards away, really. And so really the biggest hurdle is we're going to be costing the people at CVS or somewhere parking spaces. So what sort of dialogue would we need to enter into to get them to agree to consider that, even just on a temporary basis?
Well, you put your finger on the key thing, to get them to agree. And so we've got to initiate the discussion first. So I think the takeaway from this, though, is that it's worth having, but it's going to be complex, and it's going to take a while. And there'll be a lot of concerns with it from the merchants as well, so we'll need to work through those.
Vice Mayor Snyder, then Mr. Baruch.
Thanks a lot. First of all, I want to thank the Kearns Group and gentleman here who has made that program in Virginia actually happen. So welcome and thank you very much. And thanks a lot to the people who brought this forward. Very creative. I do have some questions as we go forward to think about whether we implement this and how. First question I have is why Maple? Why not Park? Why not Virginia? Why not Little Falls Street? Why not X number of other locations? And so I think we need to ask and answer that question. Second thing, seems to me one of the linchpins to this is the Kaiser Permanente garage. And the question is, do we have a long-term plan to work with Kaiser Permanente in some way to assure the availability of those parking spaces for public use for the foreseeable future? And whether we go with a farmer's market or not, it seems to me that's a fundamental issue which I would like to see us move forward on a rapid basis. Finally, farmers markets sell organic things, but they're also organic. And I wouldn't want to do anything, and I think, Wyatt, you mentioned that, we'd have to be very careful, and we'd have to work with the vendors and make sure that we don't lose what we have. But on the other hand, I'm also sensitive to it would be great if we could expand it. So, thank you.
Mr. Baruch.
Thank you. So I just wanted to thank the group for the presentation. I think this is, this has been something that lots of council members have been thinking about for a while of, how do we improve on something that's, really unique to Falls Church and has been really successful. That said, this goes to something that Howard just mentioned. I hadn't realized that, the vendors actually wanted sort of more improvements rather than just being part of the mix, because what I had been hearing from vendors, and I'm sort of a bit of a farmer's market junkie, so I love ours, but I also like visiting other farmers markets when I travel or I'm in other cities or even other markets which aren't on Saturdays. There's other markets that are similar to ours that are Sundays, so you could hit both in the region. And I oftentimes talk to vendors who I think provide a great product and say, hey, are you interested? Here's my card, here's Howard, get in touch with them. They're like, yeah, we've been trying. So that's the most common response I get, which is, I think, a great thing and really a testament to our success. What I hadn't heard is the notion of, having more amenities, if you will, whether it's electricity, et cetera, So I think that's something for us to think about. I think we need to have a vision of what we want, whether it's more vendors, which a model that was presented today, we can implement pretty quickly and pretty seamlessly and cost effectively, I'll say. But if it's something different than that, where we want to add electricity, power, et cetera, I think that's going to take a little bit more thinking, and I don't think this proposal would allow for that, just given that it's essentially a street that would essentially a Wayfair. So that wouldn't work. So I think we need to kind of, as a city, grapple with what that is and get some more inputs on the current vendors and possible future vendors of what they're looking for, because they're the ones, other than the actual consumers, that are going to make the market work and function. So I think we need a little bit more information about that before we decide what to do. And I think, to Wyatt's point, I do think that we need to take steps very carefully, because I think we've got something that's working right now, and if we sort of go in a different direction, I think we'll probably have one opportunity to do it. We can't kind of keep moving the market every few years. I think that could really diminish what we're trying to accomplish. And one thing I'll just put out there, if we're hearing from Howard on the concept of needing to improve the spaces as well. I know that we have, at least right now in the area plan that we've put forward, sort of the market alley concept, and whether there's a way of integrating a farmer's market into the market alley. And I hadn't thought about that concept before today until Howard sort of mentioned the need for infrastructure, and there may be a way of sort of doing that and accommodating the market on the weekends, and possibly having a midweek market as well, not with permanent stands, but things that can come up and down in that type of sort of pedestrian environment that would be conducive to that. But then you can have all the outlets and infrastructure that can come and go. So it might be worthwhile giving that some thought, and we could have some of the seating money, as Mayor Tarter mentioned, to do some of that. So the two, there may be some way of bridging what plans we already have, and incorporating sort of this pedestrian concept that we're hearing about today, and also this new data point that Howard's bringing in as far as what the vendors would like to see. So, thank you.
Thank you. I share some of those concerns or comments as well. I mean, one thing that I think the farmers market is just fantastic, and I'm sure it can get better, but it's pretty doggone good right now, and I would hate to mess with that in some ways. An idea that has occurred to me in the past is adding a Sunday. Have a wait list of people. I know some of those people would rather be somewhere else, maybe on a Sunday, but even as a way to say, look, if you want to come in on a Saturday, we need you to populate Sunday's market. And maybe that's something we could think about as well, as whether we want to do sort of a trial on a Sunday, which wouldn't impact our Saturday farmers market, but could be done on a smaller scale to see, how it would work, how it would function, get our feet wet with the concept. It would be much smaller, but that might be good as a start. But we've got such a great thing right now. It'd be nice to build on it, as opposed to necessarily making wholesale changes without having it kind of everything lined up. So anyway, just a thought for consideration. But I think our hats off to you, Howard, and Danny as well, for running a fantastic farmers market. I mean, it's just one of the jewels of the city. So thank you. And I guess unless there are other, absolutely, Ms. Conley.
Thank you all. One of my favorite things when we talk about plans for the city is the word placemaking. So I'm glad that you used that in your presentation. What I'm wondering is, if the farmers market doesn't go there, would you still see this as a kind of place that would be a gathering place? Because if the farmers market is there, 4 hours a week or 8 hours a week, then there's all those other times where it could still be a place without actually having a farmers market there.
Is it on? Yes, the answer is yes. That was where the idea for the permanent structures came in, was to sort of guide people who are maybe coming to the State Theater or whatever. That was one of the comments we got after we presented at Architecture Exchange East, was there was someone in the audience that used to live in Falls Church, and he said I would go to the State Theater, and maybe there's the 4 Ps, or but then there's not really much else to go to, or at least someone who doesn't know the area very well, they don't really know where to go to next. And so using things like wayfinding, we thought these permanent structures could be more like a landmark. So you stop someone on the sidewalk coming out of the State Theater and like, where can I go to grab a bite to eat or something? They say, just look for the trees, or, and in a way sort of begin this, we talked about creating like an experience from the State Theater all the way to Cherry Hill Park, and creating this like entertainment corridor through the 2 blocks. Sort of stretching that out so that it's a place.
Sure, Mr. C, and then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah. So I just want to say, besides a thank you, that at one point in time in my life, I was a very young man going to architecture school. And in fact, in the mid-'70s, AI had their national convention here, and I actually got a grant from NEA to put up a whole bunch of volunteer exhibits on the mall. And I just want to say, in recognition and celebration of volunteer efforts, that one of the exhibits that they asked whether it was worth doing was to bring in a play structure made of tires and rope and railroad ties, and that would have been the first in the country. I just couldn't really conceive of it. I said, okay, well, bring it in, let's see how it works, and of course we know how that ended up. So thank you. That's the beachhead that we need.
Thank you, Mr. Z, and thanks again to all of you. You've done a fantastic job, and we know you all have bright futures ahead of you. Thank you, Mr. Fricke, for leading this endeavor, and also, frankly, for relocating your business to here in the city. We're delighted to have you as one of our businesses. You've done a nice job with the building, and you're leading, in some ways, the renaissance of the downtown as well. So thank you all again. Mr. Shields, do you have one last thing to say?
Could I just say one thing? I think probably one takeaway from this whole experience is that the city manager is never supposed to say, I have no idea. So I want to give one very brief crack.
If you do have no idea.
The council, with a lot of public input, has already given the main impulse that has allowed this visioning to happen, which is the adoption of the downtown area plan, which creates a new vision for a downtown that's arts, entertainment, and centered, based on history, it's walkable, and a great place. And so that main impulse now needs to be implemented. And so this is one way to help us envision ways that we can practically implement that bigger vision. Another one that the council should be aware of is the EDA has commissioned a conceptual plan for the park area that fronts on Broad Street, and so that will happen over the December timeframe, and that's timely also to help inform our capital improvements program, which would be a way to assign resources to capital improvements in this downtown area. But I think a key piece to the whole thing, this is an area of commerce, and so the business owners, if this is going to be a great place, it's going to be something the business owners really buy into and are the main agents of, and then the city can help support that. And so I think this is another good impulse in a positive direction.
Thank you, Mr. Shields, and thanks again to all of you. We appreciate all your efforts. Okay, why don't we go on, get the lights up and go on to the next item if we can.
Next up is first quarter financial report. So we go from the vision to to numbers.
Jay, why don't we take just a 2-minute break to let everybody clear out if we can. If we go ahead and get started, yeah. Karen? Why don't we go ahead and get started with the meeting?
It's meeting Wednesday at 6:30.
This would be a perfect excuse not to attend.
Or to leave early, thank God.
We could all be seated.
I think they're down here.
Okay.
That would be great. Mr. Shields, why don't we move on to the next item if we can, item 2.
Mr. LeCondre will present the first quarter financial report, and then from that we'd like to pivot to a discussion of FY16 budget guidance and really just have a framework discussion about some of the priorities and outcomes that the council would like to have in that process. But we'll First, start with the first quarter financial report.
Happy Monday, Council. You have before you the first quarter. Let me remind you again, the first quarter actually does not have the kinds of significant numbers to help us with forecasting. 2 months of expenditures are from the previous fiscal year, so you only actually have 1 month of FY15 spending. Your revenues are, again, nothing spectacular. What it does give us, however, is an idea of where the revenues are going and things that we have to keep a close eye on. I'll start by telling you the first indicator for us revenue-wise is the personal property taxes. And if you look at the second line of the revenue sheet, you'll see that personal property taxes are running 5% under what we budgeted, and they're also running slightly under this time last year. And we look at all our indicators. That's the first key indicator, because that's the first full revenue item that you get a picture of. All right, the next time that we speak will be in November or December at this point. At that point, I will have 4 months of the new fiscal year, more revenue numbers that we can look at that will clarify some of the items you see now. Again, yes, ma'am.
On the personal property taxes, when people move into the city with a new car, they get added in, right?
Yes.
For that part of the year. So this number might go up a little bit, but
Yes.
okay.
There'll be additional collections.
It'll be, right. Right, yeah.
Guess I only need to buy 3 more.
We just buy
What, do you have,
All right, we'll revise your numbers.
some theories on, do you have some theories on the under collection at this point? Is, we not pushing the assessments, high enough? Well, I don't want to lead the answer, so why don't you let me know?
All right. Again, what we look at is the year over year. And the year over year would indicate that it's not a collection issue. It's just that we didn't generate as much in revenue. And we've forecasted, again, based on our trend analysis, and we need to just keep a watch on it. Generally, there are additional collections during the year, but at this point, the bulk of your taxes have been billed.
I want you to
this-
continue. Oh, go ahead.
Is this a decrease in the number of pieces of personal property, or in the value of the average value of the personal property?
That I couldn't answer.
Just as a general rule, cars are a rapidly depreciating asset, and so you need a lot of car sales just to keep values level. And so when levels grow, it means that there's, a really high level of car sales. And so what we've had, I think, is probably an average or a little bit below average number of sales happening in the city, or people in the city purchasing new vehicles.
Thank you. Why don't you continue?
Right. Again, if you look at some of the other revenues, again, what this does is it gives you a flavor for items that we need to look at. Meals tax is less than the budget target for the first quarter. The good news is that it is running slightly ahead of this time last year. Sales tax is, again, that's also running slightly behind, well, in this case, 4.5% behind what we budgeted, but for the year, it's relatively flat. All right, what this tells me is that we will continue to watch these very closely, because it does impact some of the earlier forecasts that you've been given for 16. And what we may have to do after we look at the October numbers is just scale our growth down slightly. Right, and again, on the expenditure side, nothing really significant there, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you have about the quarterly report.
So could some of this just be anomalies? In other words, like the bills went out a week later, and so now the numbers are skewed?
Yes, it could be.
Okay. No further questions, Your Honor. Does anyone
I'll
else
give
have-
I'll give you all the hope you want, but the fact is, when we budget a certain amount, we look to see if we met the target, and then the next thing that we look at is how did we do this time last year, and because it's so close, I would say that it would be very optimistic to think the bills went out a week later and we're going to get I hope you're right.
It seems surprising to me, though. I mean, there is inflation, which is sort of gets you 1.5%, 2% typically, if nothing else. And so it seems surprising to have a decrease, for example, of 5%, which seems pretty significant.
Yes.
Given that it looks like we're coming out of a recession, not going back into one, although maybe that's, who knows. Are there other questions, comments? Mr. Duncan, as chair of the Budget and Finance Committee, do you have anything
Thank you.
you'd like to state before you ask any questions?
Just want to try to summarize what I think I hear, which is that our first quarter financial report indicates no growth in our personal property taxes, small growth in our meals taxes, and a decline in sales tax receipts relative to last year. Those are the three leading indicators that you've talked about to us tonight. The major revenue source, real estate assessments, I think in your materials you say that regionally our neighbors are projecting only modest growth in real estate assessments, 2.3% for Alexandria and 3% for Arlington for next year, and that our projections are going to be similar to that.
That's correct.
We will not know that number until late January, early February.
That's correct.
Is it late January or early February, or do we know?
Mid-February.
Mid-February, okay. So between now and mid-February, we're going to be in some kind of limbo as to whether our projections are going to be closer to 2 or closer to an average that would be higher than that over the past several years, and we're just going to have to wait and find out.
That's correct.
Okay, so that puts us in a spot then when we meet with the school board on December 2nd to give the manager and the superintendent budget guidance. And so as I understand what you've given us here, you're suggesting that the bottom line, as you say, is that assuming tax rates are unchanged in FY 2016, operating budgets for schools and general government combined can grow 2 to perhaps 3%. That's based basically on not only the items like personal property taxes and meals taxes and those indicators, but the much larger real estate tax assessment number, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so that just leads me to put out there that the messaging challenge that we have is that, as always, there's the perception that homes are selling at prices in the city. Every year, how many homes are sold? 100, 150 maybe. Typically, I think there was an article in the Washington Post last week that said Falls Church City ranks second in price gains by jurisdiction. The year-to-date median sales price rose 10.3%, $700,000 from $634,000 in 2013. I know this is not a apples-to-apples comparison, but I just I put that number out there because, we were pretty sure that when we get the real estate assessment numbers in February, they're not going to be anywhere near close to 10%. They're much more likely to be at 2 or 3%. But they might be somewhere in between 2 and 10. And I know that's a broad range, and that's the challenge that we face, because we're giving you budget guidance based on of that very broad range.
But just keep in mind that your assessed value isn't based on residential alone. While a commercial may not make up as big a percentage, if it is flat or it is declining, that will drag
Correct.
the total down.
Why it's very important for people to understand that just the sales
Looking at home
of
prices
numbers
doesn't-
is not in itself sufficient for council at least to give guidance about how you all are going to be building your budget in January and February and so forth. So I just wanted to get that clear in my own head and also try to message that out, I guess, to the community. Okay, I think that's all I want to say right now.
Other questions? And also, if there is information you want to see, we've had some meetings in the past where people have said, I really would like to see X, Y, and Z. If there is materials that you want prepared, if there is information you want obtained, I think now would be the time to let Mr. LaCondra know what it is you would like him to present as we go forward in this process. Is there anyone who has any requests of Mr. LaCondra for materials, information, comparisons? Mr. Z?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm recalling that last budget season, I put forward 17 additional data slides that that covered a broad gamut of issues from retirement to assessments and so on, and agreed that we would take them up this year as opposed to last year. So that, coupled with the expressed desire and promise of a standard deck, I think that for all those that are listening tonight, that the promise that some of us have made, that you will have access to that information, and that if you're requesting certain kinds of data, that I would be pleased and honored to be the conduit of that. But you can be sure that I will be back with the list of 17 and more. And if we don't have a standard deck soon, I will help you build that as well.
You're very kind.
You're welcome.
Okay, other comments, questions?
And just on that, we I think at the last Budget and Finance Committee, we did go through the deck, and so I think we've got that data available, and we'll continue to update it.
Is there anything else anyone would like to ask? Okay, well, why don't we move on? Yes, Ms. Oliver.
As we go into the budget process for this coming year, can you update the wish list items from last year, the unfunded? Just if we could start seeing that sooner. I'm assuming that if we couldn't fund it last year, it may be difficult to fund next year, but I think I just want to be crystal clear about those items, those incremental items that we're choosing not to do.
All right, let me be clear, or let's make sure I understand what you're asking for. Generally, the unmet needs are a list that's put together after we put together the budget that we present to council. Is that what you're asking for, or are you asking for an inclusion, let's say, in the December presentation of the unmet needs from this budget year?
I would like to see the unmet needs from this budget year with an update where we were possibly able to meet some of them, so that we have a sense for what we didn't do last year as we go into this year.
Okay.
That just reminds me of one other thing I meant to say, which is the gap between 2 or 3% and whatever the number higher than that might be creates an opportunity to ask for what it is that are your core needs, and then have breakpoints at which you meet the next in needs. I think in past years, the language of saying that, there's an unmet need that we did not fund suggests that we're somehow not doing our job. If we can turn that around and say, you know what, with a healthy, keeps pace with inflation, keeps pace with school enrollment, gives a reasonable amount of growth, we are able to do these things. If it turns out that, our performance is higher, we are able to go next in on these next level priorities, and then finally maybe a third next level of priorities if things are just going tremendously excellent. It's just a different way of talking about things than we have used in the past, but I mean, I'm not beating around the bush here. I do not want to get emails from 1,000 people the week before the budget passes telling me that I am not funding, needs. I'm funding all identified needs that are reasonably accommodated by the resources that we have available. If I'm able to do more than that, then I'm funding next-in priorities. I just think it's important to begin talking about things in that way rather than to suggest that we're starting out admitting that there are some needs that we're not going to meet.
Okay, any other comments? Should we move on to the next item? Did we cover, we've done 2. Was the 3 included with what you've just said or not really? Item 3 on the agenda. Okay, why don't we go on to 3 then? I wasn't sure where 2 ended and 3 began, so why don't we go on to 3 then?
Okay. So what the council has is a brief memo from me just laying out at the highest level what we're looking at for what we currently see in terms of our constraints on the operating budget if there's no change in the tax rates. There's a couple caveats with that, and I'll note those in just a moment. In my memo, I emphasize capital projects. We have significant capital needs, and our budgeting for the last 2 years really has been organized around that. But we've included in the memo a chart of our debt service projection per the adopted capital improvements program, and you can identify each of the projects that are in the CIP that will be debt financed, when they come online, and how they impact our debt service. And that is overlaid on our existing debt service. And we'll spend time on December 2nd just talking about our capital program, what the vision is we're trying to accomplish. We're trying to work with the council and the school board on consensus on the main elements of that capital program with the knowledge of what the cost forecast would be. In that chart on the second page of that memo, the blue area at the bottom is the current debt service. And so you can see in 2022, we have our next big step down in debt service because of the community center and fire station and some residual 1996 George Mason High School improvements come off the books. And then in 2026, we have a significant step down because Mary Ellen Henderson debt comes off of her books. But we also show all the projects in the CIP coming on our books well in advance of that. And if we take the high school project and assume that half of its costs would be paid for on day one through economic development, which may or may not be possible. But at any rate, just for modeling purposes, we've modeled $50 million then and show our debt service going from the current $5 million per year up to over $12 million per year. And that's a fairly straightforward depiction of debt service. And so it is necessary that we have these challenges in mind as we're thinking about both our operating budgets and our capital planning into the future. In the packet is also the budget development calendar, and what we lay out in that calendar is a projection of Monday, January 12th being the date of adoption by the City Council of the FY16 budget guidance resolution. So the intent is to discuss it on the 2nd, bring it back to work session on January 5th, and have the council adopt it on the 12th. And then essentially the normal process proceed from there. There has been discussion of having a special town hall meeting earlier this year in the January or February timeframe on the capital improvements program specifically, so that we can raise awareness about the projects that we have, get more input on them, and help us with our CIP development process this year. Also in the packet is the budget guidance resolution from 2013 that informed the 2015 budget. And I will observe that when the council began doing budget guidance, I think in 2010, this was a one-pager, and it's grown to 3 pages. And there is value in brevity in terms of having the council send its main signals about what you're looking for in the budget. If it gets to be too big, I think it possibly dilutes some of the
Intent.
it becomes a little bit harder to absorb what the main impulse is that the council is trying to seek in terms of outcomes for the budget. That's just one observation. And so in terms of setting up a roundtable discussion for the council this evening, just to talk about what you would be looking for that we can help draft up and bring back to you at a later meeting, what are the main outcomes that you're looking for in the 2016 budget development process? What are some of the key priorities and outcomes for capital projects looking ahead 5 to 10 years that you know that this budget is going to be a big step in accomplishing? And then lastly, are there process changes looking at this calendar? Are there ways that you think that we need to think about doing things differently, and put those on the table as well? So we offer those as 3 questions to help with this discussion, and then we'll take that again and bring you a draft back and assess whether that accurately reflects what you're after.
Okay, well, let's open it up to comments and questions. Mr. Duncan, as chair of the Budget and Finance Committee, do you have anything you'd like to add?
I'd like to start by listening.
Okay. Are there others who have any comments, questions, suggestions? Ms. Oliver?
To the extent that the budget guidance is not entirely one page, but possibly consists of a list rather than bullet points, can we have a prioritized list?
Mm-hmm.
So that council can indicate its highest priority items versus the nice to haves?
Okay. Other comments, questions? There wasn't a whole lot of listening, Mr. Duncan. But
Okay, geez, I gave you a wide opening and. Oh. Okay, in the interest of brevity, I hear what you're saying about the guidance, and this is something that I'm not guilty for making larger than it is, which is perhaps shocking. But I don't feel really strongly about that. I mean, I read the guidance as it is now, and there's good stuff in there. People worked hard to come up with that. I mean, if there's anything missing from it, it's sort of a sense of that I get, when we go to these forums that have been held here over the last couple of weekends, which is that people have a sense of, possibility and excitement, and we're a little. It seems a little stern somehow in its tone. I mean, the creation of a sense of possibility, but I just don't feel that strongly about it. That will come forth if it's warranted. I wonder if Ms. Conley might have some thoughts on, because I know we've talked about this some, about the process and the town meetings and the prospect of another town meeting on the CIP. Sometimes when you hold these things on a Sunday afternoon and the league puts them on, or some independent group, you get a pretty good crowd of people who show up. At the last one at the Legion Hall, there were 70 or so people, I think. Whereas when we do our Saturday morning town halls, it just seems like people are so darn busy on Saturday mornings, we cannot get anything other than the usual suspects. So I don't have a position on this. I mean, I'll show up whenever you call it, but the idea of doing a town meeting on the CIP on a Saturday morning in January just sounds like it's not going to draw a whole lot of new folks. So that leads me to then the other ask, which is, as concerns the major CIP projects, City Hall, Library, and the high school, each of which are in a kind of dynamic state right now. Is it possible that as early as December 2nd we could include at least another set of option numbers beyond the ones that are embedded in the current CIP to reflect the fact that, for instance, the City Hall Task Force is going to recommend to the council that we go with, an option that's going to cost, going to have longer term benefits and cost a little more. The library, the $8 million number is one number, but then there's a $12 or $13 million number. The high school just continues to be a number that's all over the map. It's 100 or 120 or, can we do anything to more accurately reflect the options that are there before us, particularly for the City Hall and the library, so that when we invite people to a meeting, we're not just talking abstract. We're saying, there's choices here. There's a City Hall that is going to cost X, and there's an X plus number. What do you all think? You willing to pay for X plus or not? Same with the library. If people feel like they've got some choice that they're involved in making, maybe they'll be more likely to turn out.
I think we will have that for the City Hall and the library. I don't think we'll have that for the high school, because the high school is going through a visioning process this spring, and I think that's where those options are, we're going to know what's in and what's out through that process.
Okay, well, that's a start.
If I
And
could-
you're asking for this, excuse me, Mayor, you're asking for this December 2nd.
Mm-hmm.
I would think that would be a little bit early because the CIP process will still be in its formative stages. We won't really have anything final. And I would hate to start forecasting that if it doesn't inform the budget guidance. If we're just going to talk about a presentation to inform budget guidance, I don't know that the CIP is necessary.
If it's, I guess I'm not clear, does budget guidance include CIP? When I say budget, I think everything that we pass on April the 24th, which includes the CIP. And I do want guidance from my colleagues in the community about, for instance, City Hall, X or X plus. I think we're going to decide what to do about City Hall between now and April 24th, right? So,
If I may, for the budget guidance, it's broad in terms of CIP, in terms of your major investment areas and your commitment and how it impacts operating. By January 22nd, I have to look at the schedule, we'll be presenting the CIP to the Planning Commission. Right now, staff are just turning in all their submissions to me December 9th, and then we'll do analysis over December and first part of January. So the town hall and the CIP discussion would probably be after presentation of the Planning Commission when they start their deliberative, and we can do a joint and we can talk about the process. And it would be at that time, we certainly would know the library numbers, City Hall, and I would want to do something like you're describing where we have some pictures, some graphics, and people can get engaged and give some input and somehow more engaging instead of an official 3-minute talk back and forth. But I think it would be early February.
Of course. So why don't we do Ms. Connolly and then Ms. Oliver?
Cindy, you just brought up a question. On this list of dates, it doesn't have the CIP.
No, that is a new point that I know the chair of the Planning Commission raised with me and then met with the mayor and the chair of the school board, I believe, to brainstorm that discussion on how to have more engagement. So it doesn't show here yet.
Okay.
It's literally, I think, just this weekend started evolving. So I would propose sometime after January 20th, when I present to the Planning Commission.
Okay. But by January 20th, you're going to have what your original CIP proposal is.
And it will include the City Hall piece, since I know the task force is going to be recommending that to council. This week, the library board will be getting a briefing from the consultants on their additional studies, so we'll have that incorporated. And as Mr. Shields says, the schools will continue to be at some approximate number until the visioning.
So because you just mentioned the chair of the school board was in on the conversation, I heard from some boosters, athletic boosters recently, they're concerned about the field at George Mason. and the need to replace the field. Is that included in the January 22nd
Yes, that will be
presentation?
in
So that's
the-
already going to be in there.
The full CIP will do your IT, your public safety, your facilities, Rex and Park, and so forth. And I was just talking to Mr. Schlitt today about
Okay.
the turf CIP, which they're going to do consolidated on the general government side, and they have some new numbers, so that will be included.
Okay, so that's in there. Very good.
Ms. Oliver?
So, Mr. Shields, my request for December 2nd is that you provide also a list of the new initiatives, wish list, if you will. You know, the items that we have not funded in this year or prior years that you are looking to sometime in the future, if not in 16, fold into the budget. And I guess I'm thinking specifically about the transportation planner that we funded in the for this year that we will need to add to the operating budget next year, and any other items like that. And I understand that if we are limited to 2 or 3% growth, we may not have a lot of room for new initiatives, but I'd like to have a sense for what those might be if we could do them, or what your priorities would be if we had a little room.
Okay, are there other comments, questions? Mr. Baruch?
Yeah, so, at what point in the process do we start talking about what the drivers are gonna be in formulating the budget guidance? Is it now? Or are we gonna have another discussion about it? Because I think we're sort of all talking around what the real issues in the room are.
It's when council's ready.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on how much data you want to support that discussion. We've tried to lay out at the highest level that we anticipate that revenues will grow in the neighborhood of 3% in the next fiscal year. Those are very early projections, but that's what our neighbors are projecting, and so you know we take that as relevant data. So in that context, and in the context of,
Well, I guess
of
I'm
the capital program, then I think the council needs to decide what are the main things you want to try to accomplish.
Well, I guess one question I would have for my fellow council members, if other members are interested in having a discussion as we're setting the guidance forward, is of talking about sort of what the tax rate benchmarks are going to be. And whether we're going to build the guidance around that or we're going to build it around something else. Because I'm just getting my thinking on this sort of going.
Mr. Duncan, did you have something to say?
Oh, well, I want to respond to that question, but I'm certainly not the only one, I'm sure, who would like to. What I read earlier, the bottom line is that assuming tax rates are unchanged in FY 2016, operating budgets for schools and general government combined can grow 2 to perhaps 3%, is where I start out. Where I go from there is to say that if our revenue situation improves between now and when the manager presents his budget, or when the council acts finally upon that budget, if our revenue situation improves, then I would like to have a structure from which I could draw next in needs that we would fund with resources that we currently don't believe are going to be available. If those resources don't become available, then we don't fund those next in needs. If by some stretch home assessments are quite high, and by quite high I mean 7, 8, 9%, I think we have to talk now about some kind of structure that would enable that impact to be mitigated. And I am not going to sit here and before Thanksgiving and say that the tax rate needs to be lower than it is now, but I would think that by the end of April, if for some reason home assessments are 8 instead of 2 or 3, that part of the discussion the council would want to have would be to fund some of the next-in needs and recognize that, particularly among our population of older residents who are house rich and perhaps not so rich in cash, we would try to find ways to mitigate the impact. Maybe it's an increase in the assistance that we offer to low-income types, or perhaps it's across the board. Look at the tax rate. I don't know if that answers Mr. Briggs' question, but that's where I would start today.
Any other comments, questions? Okay. Is there anything else you all have for us?
So that's a structure that was just described of an expenditure growth structure, and then regardless of whatever happens with revenues, then any additional revenues would be then used to fund, at the council's discretion, additional items. If there's less revenue, then, well, I mean, we need to, that would be a different approach. I mean, structurally, that's a different approach for building the budget than we've done in the past.
And I just want to agree with Ms. Oliver that I would like, as soon as it's possible, for Mr. LeCondre to give that to us. His belief on best practices for vehicle fleet reserve and for that particular fund, which we've often talked about. Creating that in this year's budget and funding it as best we see fit within a level tax rate, so that we, are not doing what we have had to do in recent years, which is, fund it and then immediately spend it. And we've talked a lot about that, and I would like to see that in particular shown in our documents as early as possible.
Okay, is there anything else, or should we go ahead and wind this discussion up? Anything else, Mr. Shields or Mr. LeCondre?
Mr. Mayor, just very quickly, if I might, there are some good. Thank you. There are some good charts that we traditionally roll out during the town hall that I think we ought to roll out a little earlier. That is, where does a typical tax dollar go? How's it divided up? What parts of the city get what? So that we start a discussion in terms of not just some artificial numbers, but we start the discussion in terms of, okay, here are the services. Here's where the money goes, so that we talk about both sides of the ledger at the same time. Starting with a 0 or even a tax rate reduction is a good place to begin, but it's sort of like to get past throwing around a bunch of numbers that really aren't all that relevant to what the costs are providing services here and where the money is going. So I just think it's really helpful for the community to understand what they're getting for the dollars that they pay. And that gets lost in an artificial discussion over just one part of the equation. Well, our tax rate is this compared to somewhere else. Well, the other one that I think we ought to make more of a point of is how the small communities compare. Vienna, the towns, things like that. That's another chart. So I'd like to see earlier on some of the data and some of the presentation that doesn't normally come until the town hall meeting.
Okay, unless there's anything else, why don't we go ahead and move on to the next item? Thank you. Nice presentation.
Thank you. So now next is the legislative program and the charter change, and this is a setup for next Monday's meeting, where we'll have our delegation in front of the council and there to answer any questions and share their views about the upcoming General Assembly session with you.
I'd like to first start with the charter amendment, which is a document that's in your packet. This is generally a housekeeping cleanup to amend our charter so that it will align with the court order for the water sale proceeds and the change of the boundary. Also, the state code has been changed, and so that we should no longer define ourselves by meets and bounds. So this, as prepared by the city attorney, would clean up those two items. So this would be a standalone resolution so that we can present it to the General Assembly Legislative Services to draft the bills that our delegate and senator would sponsor. So let me pause and see if there's any questions on that before I do a highlight on the legislative program.
So instead of meets and bounds, what are they suggesting? Lots, actually?
A deed
or-
book reference.
Okay.
Deed book. And that is in the court order as well. Okay, so that will come forward on Monday for vote. And in your packet this week will be a legislative program similar to what you've seen in past years. With me being on leave, I didn't have it fully prepared, and I'll also touch base back on your legislative committee, Vice Mayor Snyder and Mr. Duncan. But the legislative program is what gives council, city manager, myself, and city attorney authority to speak on your behalf down in Richmond. And so there's similar patterns that I will be proposing for you. Regional positions and state positions, we normally incorporate them by reference because we sit on those boards. So the VML legislative program would be in there, which is very consistent with council's issues. Regional Commission, Northern Virginia Transportation Commission, and also NVTA. There are some separate regional positions that all of the Northern Virginia legislative liaisons have jointly written and their elected bodies are considering. And there are around state budget cuts, trying to prevent them and retain our partnership with the state, transit funding, and in particular license plate readers, which is a public safety item where police officers have a piece of equipment on their cars that can immediately read a license plate, which allows them to know if there's a warrant on it, if it's somebody they've been searching. It's a very good tool based on research, but there's questions about privacy and how long to retain that data. So all the police chiefs in the Northern Virginia area are establishing a policy in response to the General Assembly. They didn't take action last year to allow the police. And so, because before they were only wanting to hold the data for 24 hours and then you just don't have it when you need it. So they're looking at about 6 months. So we'd want to put that in. I've received legislative positions from the Library Board of Trustees, the Environmental Services Council, and the Electoral Board. And I will have those in the packet and I would recommend adopting those. The library speaks to restoring state money and prohibiting weapons in the library. Environmental Service Council is looking at community net metering, things around plastics, pesticides, and plastic bags or similar things that you saw last year. The Electoral Board has about 10 positions, but they all summarize around increasing voter participation and ease of voting and properly funding the General Registrar's Office and the Electoral Board with state. Within this thing specific to the city that we normally list as priority items, I would recommend, of course, a charter amendment, revisiting the local fines and fees where the state takes some of our court fees because of some past issues where they thought somebody else was taking it where it should have been from the state police instead of your local police. That's also in the VML position. I would recommend we put dangerous weapons back in. We know it won't go anywhere, but we keep the position in front of people. Pedestrian safety and crosswalks, which is also one not likely to go far, but it's very important to continue pushing the issue. FOIA and the use of technology you had last year, so I would encourage that again. New would be procurement. 2 years ago, we got increased authority, so we're similar to all the other Northern Virginia localities in our dollar amounts per contracts, which makes us much more efficient on the CIP projects. And the General Assembly is completing a 2-year study, and they're proposing some changes, so we need to monitor that so we don't lose our authority that we worked hard to get. That was actually a bill that you requested our delegation to sponsor. And then there's a new one on stormwater grant funding to allow us to have some assistance to meet those needs. So that, in a summary, is the sort of priority positions that I would recommend we consider. A lot of them similar to what you had last year.
Thank you. Let me ask Vice Mayor Snyder, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, maybe Cindy, it would be helpful to get a little bit of a lay of the land overall in Richmond. it's pretty clear that they've got money issues because they've sort of constrained taxes and haven't figured out that they need to do things like fund their pension system and other things like that. So we're going to be dealing with a very constrained environment. So in that environment, what are the 2 or 3 things that the city really ought to make major priorities? It's one thing to have a lengthy legislative program, and there are a lot of good things on there, and they should be on there, but what are we really going to focus on beyond the charter change? And then although it may be difficult, I was struck at the last town hall with our state reps that there was almost no discussion of money issues. It was all about whatever was the latest stuff that they talk about in Richmond. But for us in local governments, a lot of it's funding and the lack of support from the state. So these are just a couple initial reactions, but as we work through this, I want it to be useful for the bottom line of the city, not just a list of nice things to have on a legislative program.
Well, I think that's a really good, important part. A big legislative program gives me more flexibility when bills come up that you don't know that are going to come up, that I know it's within your themes. But I think a lot of the ones I listed are not financial implications. So like pedestrian, dangerous weapons, I think are worth pursuing. And before I forget, I do want to note that I did forget to mention, I've been exploring, and I've spoken to Mr. Clinton, and had a chance to brief Vice Mayor Snyder briefly about DMV Select and the hours and trying to get more flexibility. So I've been talking to our senator, who's firmly believes just because of the function of the General Assembly we won't get a bill through, but he has offered to speak to the Secretary of Transportation and see if we can work on an administrative solution, since the Commissioner of DMV can control the operation of hours. So I do want to have that as a position, but not to ask for a bill, but to work on a resolution. In terms of the specific focus that would impact us the most in the constrained state funding, which the money committees just met this weekend, and we don't have a lot of vision yet, but they're starting to work on it, but we do know it's going to constrain. I think we need to look at the local fines and fees because that's a dollar impact on us. I think we need to watch the police funding again because that'll be always at risk of being cut. And then just in general, the library board has asked for a focus on the state funding because it has decreased in about 13% over the last 4 years.
And of course, the big one is the school funding formula, right?
But one that we're also worried about is the repeal of B-Poll and machinery and tools tax. And that is discussed every year, but every year it gets more and more serious. The one thing I would just note also, I'm on the Governor's Mandates Task Force, and at their first meeting they elected me chair, which was, I think, the guy who showed up last at the meeting.
Congratulations, we think.
Yeah, and it's a sort of it's just a thankless task because this thing has been studied so many times, and it's just such a difficult thing for localities to work with the state government. But we do have 6 points that we've communicated to the governor, and I will send that memo to the council so you're aware of those as well, and ask for your support in the legislative program for those as well. And those really do get to bottom line dollar issues for local governments.
Thank you.
So let me ask, I think VML has basically a lobbying day, where local governments go down to the state legislature. When is that? Would you all think it's advisable for some or all of us to go down on that day? And just sort of what's your position on that?
It will be in February. I think it's very informative and helpful. Mr. Duncan has joined me. There's been times that Mr. Snyder's been able to join. It's a good opportunity to hear straight, usually from the governor, and then we walk the halls and try to do some committee meetings, talk to people, do the regional meetings on transportation, usually meet down there. I think the visibility and interaction, and to see that City of Falls Church is tracking this and is engaged and cares about it is pretty important to the electeds. Since we only have one senator and one delegate, I usually walk you around enough and walk your feet off so that we go talk to other people on committees to make sure they're aware of us and whatever networks and relationships. So I think it's very important to have at least one council member and just not a staffer attending.
Well, maybe as it approaches, you could remind us and see if we can get one or more folks to head on down with you. Mr. Duncan, do you have anything
It's
to add?
an opportunity to see how many people Cindy Mester knows in Richmond. That's what's really awesome, because you can walk the halls and find out every place she used to work or live or, you know, went to school or whatever. It's very impressive. And now that Mr. Shields is a big shot on the task force, we've got 2 reasons to go. It is interesting, and I think it's good for our little city to have some visibility, so I'd encourage folks to go if they can.
Anything else on this one?
So lastly, we have a resolution of appreciation for the Honorable James P. Moran. And if you'd like, we could go through it in detail, or if the council is comfortable with it. What the request is tonight is to take action on that tonight so that we can get this framed up and sort of in a presentable format and have it presented to him next Monday night.
And this resolution captures in a summary a lot of the projects and funding that he's done over numerous years for us. We will also be putting together sort of a photo collage that I hope to have framed that will show some of the projects that he's funded, such as our stormwater, the transit plaza, the affordable housing at the Housing Corp, et cetera, and be able to thank him in that manner.
Do you think he's going to want a collage of stormwater pipes?
It'll be the Hamlet Reese.
Yeah, that's all you're getting, Phil.
He actually will. I'll have to say he's been monitoring all through this process and kind of tracking, you know, when we might be ribbon cutting. So I've been keeping him updated when we started the Hamlet Reese part. So it's amazing how detail oriented he stays to these items.
Okay.
And he's got to remember the City of Falls Church.
Mr. Z?
Thanks, Mayor. I like the resolution. It says many things that he is, and what I would like to add is the word friend of the city. I don't know, he supports it, familiar face, has helped improve. I think no better word than friend of the city, and maybe that would be somewhere in line 46.
Mm-hmm.
Friendship, but I don't know if that works. Congressman Moran, we remembered for support and friendship, for his friendship and support. It's a little different than you said, but it's pretty close. Does that work for you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
do we need to discuss this more or just move on it?
I think we need to move on.
I'd like to move the approval of the resolution in expressing our appreciation to Congressman Moran for his long support for the city.
And would that include Mr. Z's, okay,
Is there a second for the motion?
I'll second that.
okay.
Can
What
I
do we
just
call- Go ahead.
ask a question for discussion purposes? So the only facility that I know of in town that's named after Mr. Moran is the Winter Hill community room. I know you mentioned affordable housing is one of the concerns here. I just wonder, I mean, does your collage have a picture of that? That's just a venue that I might have called it out specifically in the text, but if there's some other way that he's...
Yeah, I was planning to do both the room and the, he actually got a grant that helped us with storm windows and storms and water heaters. A little harder to capture at Winter Hill, but we were going to try to capture that for Winter Hill. He actually attended the farmers market celebration when we were number one, so we have that picture. So we're going to kind of mix it up.
So there's things that elaborate on the text that's here that will
Exactly.
be visual. Okay.
And then I'm also contacting Christopher Frey, who's the executive director of Homestretch, because Mr. Moran has also been extremely successful in getting Homestretch some funding as well as so two of our nonprofits plus the city directly.
Okay,
Ms.
thanks.
Conley?
The other person who may have pictures is Sally Cole, because he's done a lot with the Chamber of Commerce, been at Chamber of Commerce events, galas, so she may have.
Good, thanks.
Okay, is there anyone who wishes the public to comment on this? Even though it's a work session, we are taking some action. Seeing none, the matter's close to the public. Ms. Mester, will you call a roll call vote?
Certainly. Mr. Baruch? Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Mr. Duncan?
Yes.
Ms. Oliver?
Yes.
Mr. Snyder? Mr. Z?
Yes.
Mayor Tarter?
Yes?
That passes, council. Thank you.
Okay. So what's next? Is that on to council comment and questions? And let's see here. Okay, so council comments and schedule. Is there anything, Mr. Z?
Thanks, Mayor. Today, I attended along with Citizen Tim Stevens and staff member Jason Wistrom, an all-day training session at the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments on driving the National Capital Region solar market. So there's a sense at COG that we have ahead of us an opportunity to engage in community bulk solar purchasing. They brought a variety of experts and people in the area that have done municipal solar procurement, including Montgomery County and District of Columbia. And they Solarize Frederick, Solarize Innova, and other solar cooperatives. And at the last meeting of the ESC, they passed a resolution to encourage the city to join Solarize Virginia. And so I ask that if we are to move forward and try to get smarter and actually do some projects in this area, that it would be useful to have Solarize Virginia appear at a work session in January. I know its calendar is filling up rapidly, but so we have a presentation on what that would mean. At the very least, it would help inform our efforts on putting panels on any City Hall expansion or Mount Daniel or any number of citizens in this fair city of ours that want to have that.
Mr. Shields, do you have any comment? I know we've spoken previously about the Solarize in Northern Virginia project.
Let me follow up with Councilmember Z, and because there's the NVRC initiative, and then there's this COG training. I think they're all aligned in the same direction, slightly different programmatically, and so let's talk after this, and we'll figure out what we bring to council.
Sounds good. Other comments, questions? Yes, Ms. Oliver.
Mr. Shields, would it be possible to get an update on the occupancy at the Northgate commercial units?
Let me send that out to council.
Okay, other comments? Ms. Conley, sure.
One is that I am the council liaison to the Aurora House Girls Home Committee. And at their recent meeting, and I sent this note to you, and you said it's being taken care of, but they were really concerned that they didn't have computers that were appropriate for the girls to do their homework. So I'm grateful if the city is able to solve that problem for them. They said they couldn't accept donated computers because they had to be on the city system, and there was some concern about firewalls and other things, but because of the situation of the residents of the home, they can't have laptops. They need to have desktops and be monitored at all times. So it seems to me something that the city should be able to take care of as best we can.
Yes, and it is being taken care of. I appreciate you bringing it to my attention, but it was in process, and I'll send out the update.
And then my other one is just a concern about the website. There's this link to the Joint Process Planning Committee that sends you down a rabbit hole. And 2 weeks ago, when I was trying to find the date for that meeting, and there was a citizen also who was trying to find the date, and he said, well, I didn't go to the meeting because it didn't show up on the calendar. So if you go to calendar, it says that Process Planning Committee is inactive, and then it brings you to the last set of minutes, which is May 8th, but then there's another link that works. So there's two different.
Is there probably one symbol off or something?
It's
like that,
right,
so
exactly.
sometimes-
Or there's some little thing that just needs to be updated.
Okay.
And I'm happy to send I think I sent the bad links at some point
Mhm.
when I was confused, but it hasn't been fixed yet. So, because I think there's a meeting, is there a meeting of that planning committee Thursday morning?
Not this Thursday. I think
There's
the
not.
next one is in December.
Okay.
Anything else? Or shall we move to adjourn?
Mr. Mayor,
Miss Oliver wanted to.
I just didn't want you to adjourn.
Okay.
Sometime by the end of the year or very early next year, could we please revisit committee assignments and finalize that update?
Okay, I support that too. The task force, City Hall Public Safety Facility Task Force, met, and I'm your liaison to that group. Just wanted to ask the staff a question about timing of when that report would be presented. Mr. Mack, I think had thought that we were going to be meeting into December, but as I understand it, are we still following the plan that work session on the 1st is not going to be held, but it's going to be a joint session with the school board on the 2nd, and our meeting on the 8th is in Arlington. So we are done with in-chambers meetings on November 24th. So, Ms. Mester, do you have any thoughts about when council would receive a formal notification of the City Hall Task Force work product?
We had originally hoped to present it in work session so that you could answer questions beyond just receiving the formal memo. But with the schedule change, that obviously won't happen in December, so we could go ahead and forward the memo once the task force finalizes it and do something in January, or just roll it into the CIP pending council's preference. But the task force, since you chartered them specifically, wanted to be able to acknowledge to council what the recommendation is after reviewing the materials.
Okay, well, I'll leave it up to you all. The document, I think, will be ready by early December, and so my vote would be to try to get into the hands of everybody on council and to post it online and just generally make people aware of what the recommendations were, so you can think about them before we come into business in January. But it's up to you all.
Well, if need be, I mean, this joint work session, we can have a work session of our own before we have, or after we have a work session with the school board. So if there's pressing business, we can take care of it at that meeting as well.
It's up to you. I mean,
Okay,
I
well,
guess
why don't we take a look and see the output and
the
then
school
figure
board.
out what
Okay.
action is necessary.
Okay, the school board, I didn't know whether they would have a dog in the city hall hunt.
If I could just note, so there's no suspense, they reviewed all 4 options, and you will
Yes.
be getting a recommendation to fund all 4, and so it'd have to be considered in the CIP and prioritized with your other projects.
Right. Thank you. Second, the GovOps committee normally would meet on November 25th at noon. I think we're going to go ahead and do that. And employee evaluations and compensation are going to be our primary focus. I think we'll probably be asking all the members of council to do some homework with some materials that we'll hand out to you that those of you who've been on council will be familiar with. So that's just a heads up that will be coming your way. The Budget and Finance Committee would normally meet that evening on the 25th. It is the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. One member is at least not able to attend. I will do whatever the group wants to do as to whether we meet or not. We will be having the December 2nd budget guidance meeting, so if there's a feeling that people want to talk with each other more before that, then we could meet that 25th or not. If people would just let me know what their preference is, if you're going to be out of town or just don't want to meet that close to Thanksgiving, please let me know. I wanted to ask the manager about the 604 North Oak situation. I don't know if you need to tell me right now, but let's just not end the year without knowing what the situation is. Thank you. And finally, as you know, the mayor asked me to reach out to the chamber and downtown and other businesses in the city about bringing some more vibrance to the downtown area. In pursuit of that, and I don't know how you want to handle this, but staff has done quite a lot of good work in a hurry. Our arborist has sent a memo today giving us information and options for tree lighting in the downtown area. I don't know if anybody else has had a chance to see this email or not. Obviously, this is something that is relevant to, the end of year, particularly Watch Night happening downtown. The total amount of money involved, she estimates, to install labor and equipment is about $20,000. There are, sums lower than that, which would do only the trees in the park, $3,000. The trees in the 200 block, $3,000. So if you look at this memo, you can see that, there are some very affordable options for creating a little more excitement in our downtown area. The arborist has, said the trees will not die if we put lights on them, so that's a positive step. I'm asking, I guess, if we could, at our meeting on the 24th, consider this in some way. If it's a budgetary impact thing that can be handled administratively, could council authorize that to be done? If it has to be transferred from one account to another, then we need to act. Can we do that? Because we're not meeting in December, I just want to, put it out here now and try to get us to decide pretty soon whether we're going to try to do this or not.
So what exactly is the proposal? I mean, I understand in general, but is it to do which blocks exactly?
Well, there are some cost estimates for tree lighting. We will hire a contractor for the light installation and removal, since public works crews are booked up with projects already. Solar panels may involve some trial and error for each tree, and she breaks down the cost for materials and labor. It's $270.61 per tree. Roughly $275.
And so none of them use electricity?
I believe that's what she's
solar
suggesting here, and we're wrapping the trunks. We're wrapping the trunks, not the limbs, so there's less labor involved. It's like the Shirlington approach, basically. If you've been down to Shirlington, that's what they do with their trees.
And is there a specific blocks that's been requested? The 100 and 200 block on both sides of the street? Is that
the $3,000 gets you the park next to the Unity Club. That's 10 trees. $3,000 gets you the north side of the 200 block. That's another 10 trees. $6,000 gets you the north and south side of the 100 block without the park. She's got things broken down basically any way you want it to include the 100 and 200 blocks and the mini park, solar lit trunks only for around $20,000.
And staff have a position on this?
Is Mike still here?
Yeah, he's still here.
Good evening. This is very preliminary work that the arborist has done. The original intent was actually to do this work in support of the businesses down there, with the expectation that the businesses would actually implement these. So Ms. Reich, formerly Ms. Sutalo, now Ms. Reich, she had done some background work and worked with the Chamber of Commerce. It evolved into questions about, could the city do this? And that's where she threw together some very rough numbers. It could be done by us. I'm a little bit reluctant. She has offered that she could manage a contractor installing it. We haven't looked at all into purchasing and what it would take for purchasing. So that could be a hang-up. And one other comment too. These are we're not sure of how well these solar lights function. We've done very little research into them and heard that they can have some problems, but it's simpler than stringing electrical power out there. So we're interested to give it a try. It certainly supports, I think Mr. Z would be pleased to see solar lights. And we could give it a try, but we can't really guarantee that how well they're going to work. It's a bit of a trial.
Yeah, my my knowledge of solar lighting is that it's still kind of a wild frontier. You can pay a lot and not get anything. And of course, the bigger question is this for the benefit of all the citizens or just for a few businesses? But that's for public discussion. From the technical point of view, I would say this is probably not something we want to do.
So has the chamber formally endorsed this idea? I know there's been discussion over the
Yeah,
years.
I mean, the chair's been talking about it for, I don't know, 15 years.
But I mean, I know there's been discussion. I've participated in some of that, but is there
At
actually
the
like
board,
a formal
at the last
position?
board meeting, there was considerable discussion. Mike's right. I mean, some of the businesses would like to go ahead and do this on their own. And, you know, if we could even accomplish that, if we could allow businesses, you know, at the risk of everything not being completely uniform, which I guess is one concern, but, you know, there would be an introduction of the concept that we could light trees in the city of Falls Church. There would be, I think, some businesses willing to do it. And then the question is, would we, as just a test, you know, do the trees in the park, in the mini park, which is 10 trees according to the arborist. That's kind of the minimum effort you would expend, probably.
Mr. Snyder.
Could I suggest we have a proposal back that Phil works on with staff, with the chamber and the EDA. We bring it back. I'd like to move forward on something. I actually know a very long history of this. It may come as a shock, but there's a history to this issue in Falls Church. It goes back at least 20 years. There was, including an opinion about you didn't really want to do this because it would kill the trees. So I'd like to get a recommendation back. I happen to like this. I think we should have done it years ago, but we need the arborist sign off. I also don't, I would like this to be focused on the business section and not on that little park. My own view is I'd like to maximize the economic development value of this and make that intersection of Broad and Washington something brighter and more unique than it is now. So that would be my own views, but why don't we get a recommendation back, seems to me.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, the things that I think we should know are, A, what does the business community want? How far should it go? In other words, the 102 block of Broad Street, should it go a block up Lee Highway or Washington both ways? Where should it go? Where do people want it to go? And then a little bit about the technology. If you can find any local places where they've used the same lights you propose to use. For example, we heard Shirlington. Okay, to Shirlington, can we use the same ones they use? Or, you know, because if we have to wire these, that's a much bigger price tag, I'm sure, than just using solar power. But the question is solar going to work? I know everybody'd like to do this, but I'd hate to put something up and then have it fail or be just kind of not good. And so I would like to know a little bit more about the technology, what type you would recommend and where has it been used in the Northern Virginia region so we can kind of get our arms around it. And then I'd also like to see a photo or something of just what does it look like doing the whole tree versus just the trunk. You know, I know it's cheaper to do the trunk, but maybe it doesn't look half as good. I don't know. I can't recall. I know Old Town's got them. I remember seeing those for many years, but I think that's the whole tree. And so the question, I guess, would be, you know, what are the different options? Just the trunk, the tree, what's the difference in price, and the look, you know, how it might look. But I think the idea of getting something more formal proposed, I think, is appropriate. Do others have other things they would like to consider, or different viewpoints on that? Yes, of course.
And that is, I think that there are members of the Chamber of Commerce who will happily pay to do their area, even if it is not right in that main downtown area. Other property owners along Maple or other areas. So they would, and part of the conversation at the Chamber of Commerce meeting that Phil and I attended was there was interest, but no one really understood how much it cost. So it would be helpful to businesses to see that proposal too and see how much it would cost them if they indeed wanted to do it on their own as part of a group.
Go ahead.
The what Ms. Reich, our arborist, sent out today did go to Ms. Cole at the Chamber of Commerce and had some costs in it. Specifically down in Shirlington, I think that they do use electrical connections. I believe they have. I believe they have electrical outlets on their streetlights that they're able to use. We have looked into running temporary wires. There's a feasible way to do it, but seemed somewhat challenging and a bit more effort than people wanted. So the thought was we could at least start with solar, see if they work.
But I think instead of just trying it, it would be good to get some information about other localities that have used it, instead of just sort of winging it. I imagine somebody else has thought of this before us, and if so, maybe we could contact even their public works department. Hey, Des Moines, Iowa has some. And how's it work?
We'll check Phoenix, Arizona.
Yeah. But I tell you, I also have a little concern about just sort of haphazardly doing a business somewhere to have, 2 trees, nothing, and then a tree. I think really for this to work, you'd want to have a coherent plan and scheme so that certain blocks, full blocks, are done that are contiguous. But maybe if staff could consider it and we could present something back to us, as Vice Mayor Snyder has suggested, in the near future, we can try to maybe move this along.
Timeline, as Mr. Snyder mentioned, next week's your last meeting.
Well, it's not the last meeting, but it would be a great meeting to consider this. If you're able to put something together in the next week, that would be very helpful to us.
We'll see what we can do. If we're not able to meet that, would we be waiting till after the holidays?
Well, I think the idea would be to do it before the holidays, because the holidays are a real nice time to have lights in your trees. So, we can only do what we can do, or you can only do what you can do. But I think the idea would be to expedite this as much as possible. And I know Mr. Duncan and others would be happy to work with you in the chamber as well to try to move this along.
See, I'm not like DNC. I can't wait years and years for his deck items or whatever, or his street light to be fixed. Yeah, well, that's my question. What can we accomplish by next Monday in terms of information? And, we can act on that information, whatever it is, and decide to do it or not do it. But, Kate has got some pretty good basic information here, I think, that reflects some of the research she's done. So, can we build on that?
We'll focus on trying to find better information as to who's used this solar and is it feasible. See what else we can get back by Monday.
All right, are there any other? Ms. Conley?
I just have a question about the trailer ordinance. We've gotten a couple comments from citizens and concerns about that ordinance. It's set for second reading next Monday. Do we want to move that to January to incorporate some of those concerns?
The city attorney is working with the police chief on the comments we're getting, and also just on the council's comments. And so we will ask for deferral on your next meeting, and so that would then be for action on January 12th is what we would shoot for.
And along that line, the Mason Road project, do you have any updates for council or for the public as a whole?
I do. We met last Thursday with the Spectrum Development Group, and they have put together a schematic of a revised project plan. They are planning to have a resubmittal of their application, which we expect in early December. And they're also planning a town hall meeting that they would organize and sponsor on December 15th to get information out to the public on changes that they've proposed. In summary, those changes are that they've added an additional commercial lot on the frontage of the project. The residential lots on the back of the project remain in the project. They have made plans to include the theater, but that is contingent upon some public support for that theater. And so we discussed that with the EDC on just a basic framework and parameters for that discussion. They've added an office component to it, which is new, 35,000 square feet of office in the project. The hotel is slightly smaller, 140-room hotel, as opposed to the 150 in the last version. The retail locations are roughly the same. The apartments are roughly the same. The market square in the center on Mason Row is larger than it was in the first earlier iteration. The condos in the project are out. In the location where the condos were in the last application is a structured parking garage that is 4 stories tall, and which would be along the frontage of the Park Avenue area. There would be no vehicular access to Park Avenue, however, from that parking garage. Those are a couple of the highlights in terms of a summary, and once we get an application, we'll be working with the public on getting that information out, and that December 15th town hall meeting will be probably the first big opportunity for people to learn about the plans.
And will those plans be given to staff or council prior to the open house on the 15th?
Well, the resubmittal, I think probably December 10th is their target date, and so we will not have anything other than basically a line drawing, which we have right now, until then, as best I know.
Vice Mayor Snyder?
Just to reiterate my request about the cost of putting some or all of the library capabilities in that development. Thanks.
Okay,
Other comments? Or should we go ahead and have a motion to it?
I have just one very small scheduling thing.
Okay.
The schools have a contract pending with Grunley, with the firm of Grunley to build the Mount Daniel Elementary School. The city attorney's been reviewing that contract. Under the state law for PPEA contracts, it is typical for the governing body, i.e. the city council, to approve that contract. We're just checking that through, but if that is the case, what we would ask is that on November 24th, we add that contract approval to your agenda. And that's pending a couple more things that the city attorney is checking out, but I just wanted to give the council a heads up on that request.
Thank you. The last.
Would there be an opportunity to add something to that contract after it's approved? Can you ask the city attorney that question?
Maybe we can talk offline about what that is. It certainly gets harder after that point.
Yes.
Okay, any other comments? Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Move. We adjourn.
We have a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Ayes have it. We are adjourned.